The stone chapel trembled with the weight of their words. 7 men in worn white mantles gathered in a half circle, their faces illuminated by a single oil lamp, casting long shadows across the abandoned abbey's walls. Outside, rain lashed against stained glass depicting saints now looking down in judgment upon the last free Templars in France. They have taken Paris. Chinon has fallen. The temple treasuries are seized. Grandmaster Jacques de Molay's voice carried despite his weakened state. 3 months in Philippe's dungeons had left his body broken, yet his spirit remained unyielding. Brothers, I have been granted a reprieve to settle order affairs before my execution, but we have little time. Brother Guillaume de Nogaret, keeper of the archives, stepped forward. The king's men search for any Templar wealth they can claim, but they know nothing of our true treasure. The Sigil, whispered Brother Arnaud de Goth, his voice barely audible over the storm. You believe the vision was authentic? De Molay closed his eyes. 3 nights before my arrest, as I knelt in prayer at the Temple Mount, I was granted a vision. A brilliant light descended, and within it appeared a symbol, one I had never seen in our sacred texts. This sigil burned itself into my mind, and with it came knowledge, terrible knowledge. The gathered knights leaned closer. I saw the fall of kings and popes. I witnessed the rise of false prophets who turned Christ's teachings to corruption. I beheld wars that would engulf nations with weapons beyond comprehension. And I saw a final deception, a unifier who would come bearing signs and wonders, claiming to unite all faiths, but serving only the adversary. Brother Thibaut Godin, an aging warrior monk who had survived the fall of Acre, growled, "Then we must warn Christendom." No, de Molay's voice hardened. The prophecy also showed that revealing this knowledge prematurely would only hasten the calamity. It must be preserved, hidden until the appointed time when the stars align in the heavens as they appeared in my vision. Only then can the warning be heeded. Brother Hugh de Perrot unrolled a parchment on the rough-hewn table. I have transcribed the vision as you dictated, Master. The text contains the prophecy, but I have encoded it through the cipher known only to the inner temple. De Molay nodded. The manuscript must be divided. No single man can possess the entirety of the knowledge. The burden is too great, the danger too severe. The 7 knights worked through the night. The coded manuscript was separated into 3 parts. The first containing the opening of the vision, warnings of collapse and betrayal. The second detailing the signs by which the false Messiah would be known. The third revealing the path of renewal, how the spiritual knighthood might be reborn from ashes. Before dawn broke, they knelt in a circle. De Molay drew his ceremonial dagger and sliced his palm. By blood we are bound to this sacred trust. The first fragment shall journey east to the lands where our order first found its purpose. Brother Everard de Villiers, the youngest among them, accepted the sealed cylinder. I shall take passage to Cyprus, then Jerusalem. The fragment will rest where Templars once guarded the Holy of Holies. The second fragment must go where Rome's reach is weakest, de Molay continued, passing a leather pouch to Guillaume de Nogaret. Beyond the Northlands, where the old ways still hold sway. Scotland, Guillaume nodded. Robert Bruce owes our order a debt for our support against Edward. The Highlands will keep our secret. And the third, the key to understanding all, must disappear entirely. De Molay held the final section, carefully wrapped in oilskin and sealed with the Templar cross pressed into black wax. This I entrust to you, Arnaud. Your family's lands in Languedoc hold secrets older than the church itself. Arnaud bowed his head. The caves beneath my ancestral estate have concealed heretics and sacred relics for centuries. Your trust honors me. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, de Molay raised his bloodied hand. Remember the signs that will herald the time for reunion. When the crescent moon passes before the sun in darkness, when the morning star rises in the west during the feast of John the Baptist, when the great powers of earth tremble 7 times in 7 days, then, and only then, must the fragments be brought together. The knights murmured their assent. I go now to my fate, de Molay said, struggling to stand. History will record that our order died this year. Let it be so. In secret, we endure, not as warriors with swords, but as guardians of truth. The last sigil will remain hidden until its appointed hour. They embraced as brothers for the final time, then slipped away one by one into the misty dawn, each carrying a fragment of a prophecy too dangerous for the world to know. Jacques de Molay walked steadily back toward Paris, toward the pyre that awaited him. As flames would later consume his mortal form, his last words would be mistaken for a curse against king and pope. In truth, they were the first line of the prophecy. When the temple falls twice, the false light shall rise. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood wiped sweat from her brow as she carefully brushed dirt from the carved stone. 3 weeks into the archaeological dig at the ruins of La Cavalerie, one of the best preserved Templar commanderies in southern France, and finally something beyond the expected medieval detritus. Michel, bring the light closer, she called to her graduate assistant. The young Frenchman hurried over, adjusting the portable LED panel. What have you found, Professor? I'm not sure yet. Her brush revealed an unusual seam in the flagstones, too precise to be natural weathering. This section of the floor doesn't match the documented plans. It's as if... She paused, running her fingers along the edge. A slight depression yielded to her touch, and the stone shifted with a sound like distant thunder. Eleanor and Michel exchanged glances before carefully lifting the stone. Beneath lay a small cavity, and within it, a cylindrical object wrapped in deteriorating leather. Photograph everything before we proceed, Eleanor instructed, her heart racing. Undisturbed Templar artifacts were exceedingly rare. Most had been seized during the Purge or discovered by treasure hunters centuries ago. Back at the field laboratory that evening, Eleanor carefully unwrapped the find. The leather had protected an ivory cylinder, etched with geometric patterns that combined Christian symbolism with something older, patterns reminiscent of sacred geometry. When she finally managed to open the delicate container, she found a parchment scroll, the Latin text faded but legible. As she translated the first lines, her academic skepticism gave way to growing fascination. The first fragment of the last sigil, entrusted to the guardians of the East. When the temple falls twice, the false light shall rise. The mighty shall crumble as dust, markets shall devour themselves, and the 7 towers of commerce shall burn and collapse. The text continued with apocalyptic imagery before ending abruptly mid-sentence, clearly part of a larger document. At the bottom was a peculiar symbol. Interlocking triangles surrounding a central eye, with astronomical markers she didn't recognize. Eleanor's phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. The caller ID showed Cardinal Navarro, Vatican Historical Office. Dr. Blackwood, the accented voice began without preamble. I understand congratulations are in order for your discovery at La Cavalerie. Eleanor frowned. She hadn't published anything, and only her small team knew about today's find. Cardinal, I'm surprised by your interest in our work. The Church maintains an active interest in all Templar discoveries. Doctor, historical accuracy is our shared goal, yes? I've taken the liberty of dispatching Father Domenico Salvatore to assist your team. He's an expert in medieval church history. That's very generous but unnecessary, Eleanor replied carefully. We have all the expertise required. Nevertheless, he arrives tomorrow. The Vatican would appreciate your full cooperation. The line went dead before she could respond. Eleanor stared at the parchment fragment, unease settling over her. Her mentor at Oxford, Professor Richard Keller, had specialized in Templar history before his mysterious accident 3 years ago. Before his death, he had become increasingly paranoid, speaking of a powerful group called Custodes Secreti, guardians of secrets, operating within the church to suppress certain historical discoveries. At the time, she'd attributed his theories to stress and overwork. Now she wasn't so certain. Eleanor carefully photographed the parchment and the cylinder from every angle, then encrypted the files and sent them to her secure cloud storage. As an afterthought, she sent a copy to her estranged brother Thomas, a cybersecurity specialist in London, with a brief message. "If anything happens to me, this is important. Love, Ellie." The following morning, she found Michel waiting outside her hotel, his face ashen. "Someone broke into the lab last night," he reported. "They took nothing but the Templar artifact." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Did you tell anyone else about our find?" "Only Dr. Devereaux at the university when I called for permission to use the carbon dating equipment." Michel hesitated. "Professor, there's something else. I reviewed the security footage. The intruder, he was wearing clerical clothing." Eleanor gripped her phone, deciding quickly. "Pack your things, Michel. We're taking an unscheduled research trip." "Where to?" She pulled up her brother's last email. A Christmas card featuring his stone cottage in the Scottish Highlands, where he'd retreated after a cyber attack he'd helped investigate had resulted in death threats. "Scotland," she replied. "And we need to find everything we can about something called the Last Sigil." As their train sped north that afternoon, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At a station stop in Lyon, she noticed a man in a dark coat observing them from the platform. When their eyes met, he didn't look away but instead made a subtle gesture, touching his right eye, then drawing an invisible triangle in the air. A warning? A threat? Eleanor couldn't tell, but as the train pulled away, she understood with absolute certainty that the parchment fragment had set her on a path there would be no returning from. In her pocket, she clutched the only item she'd managed to hide before the theft, a brass key that had been concealed in a hidden compartment of the ivory cylinder, overlooked by the thief. Etched into its bow was the same strange symbol from the parchment, the sigil itself. Thomas Blackwood's remote Scottish cottage seemed like it belonged to another century. Stone walls 3 feet thick, windows like arrow slits, and a fortress-like quality that now seemed particularly appropriate. Eleanor had always teased her brother about his paranoia. Now she was counting on it. "So you're being chased by evil priests because of some old Templar parchment?" Thomas summarized after she'd explained everything. His small living room was dominated by computer equipment, creating an odd juxtaposition against the rustic surroundings. "I know how it sounds," Eleanor admitted, "but someone broke in specifically for that artifact, and the Vatican somehow knew about our discovery almost immediately." Thomas tapped at his keyboard. "The church does maintain an office called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, evolved from the Old Inquisition. They monitor theological matters, but there are rumors they have a black operations division that handles sensitive historical artifacts." "Custodes Secreti," Eleanor murmured. "I'm not finding anything official under that name, but..." Thomas trailed off, his expression changing as he stared at his monitor. "That's interesting. There's been a financial directive issued to all major auction houses and antiquities dealers in the last 24 hours, offering a substantial reward for information about artifacts bearing a specific symbol." He turned the screen toward Eleanor. The digital rendering matched exactly the sigil from the parchment. Michelle, who had been quietly examining the brass key, suddenly looked up. "Professor, I think I recognize this design. Not the symbol, but the key itself. It's very similar to keys used in Scottish Templar properties." Eleanor turned to him. "How do you know that?" "My master's thesis was on Templar architectural influences. Many Templars fled to Scotland after the Purge. The excommunication order wasn't enforced there because of Scotland's own conflict with Rome. Rosslyn Chapel is the most famous example, but there are others." Thomas was already searching. Templar sites in Scotland. There's Ballantradock, now called Temple, Maryculter, Kildrummy Castle, the chapel at Mount Hooley. "Wait," Eleanor interrupted. "Go back to Kildrummy. The Earls of Mar were known Templar sympathizers." Thomas pulled up historical records. Kildrummy Castle passed to the Mar family in the early 14th century. Significant renovations during that period, including a Chamber of Secrets mentioned in a 1390 inventory, but never located by modern archaeologists. Eleanor examined the key more closely. The Mar family crest included a 5-pointed star. "Look at the teeth of this key. They form a pentagram pattern." Michelle nodded excitedly. "And Kildrummy is only about 40 miles from here. It's not just about finding the next fragment," Eleanor cautioned. "According to the parchment, the prophecy speaks of specific astronomical signs that must align before the sigil should be revealed. One was when the morning star rises in the west during the feast of John the Baptist." Thomas was already pulling up astronomical data. Venus is currently in its evening phase, visible in the western sky after sunset. And the feast of John the Baptist is June 24th. That's next week. "What about the solar eclipse mentioned in de Molay's instructions?" Michelle asked. Thomas checked another database. "There's a partial solar eclipse visible from Europe in exactly 9 days. Eleanor felt a chill. "And the 7 tremors in 7 days?" As if in answer, Thomas's phone buzzed with a news alert. He read it aloud. "Unusual seismic activity reported in Jerusalem. The 3rd minor earthquake this week has damaged sections of the Temple Mount, leading to archaeological emergency measures." They looked at each other in silence, the implication hanging in the air. After 7 centuries, the conditions specified in the Templar prophecy were aligning. "We need to get to Kildrummy immediately," Eleanor said, gathering her things. "If I'm right, the second fragment is there, and we're not the only ones looking for it." Thomas hesitated. "Ellie, if these people are as dangerous as you think, maybe we should contact the authorities." "And tell them what?" "That we're searching for a secret Templar prophecy that might predict the apocalypse." She shook her head. "Besides, how do we know the custodies don't have influence with the police?" As they prepared to leave, Eleanor's phone chimed with an email notification. The sender was listed simply as a friend, but the content made her blood run cold. "Dr. Blackwood, I was a colleague of Richard Keller. He entrusted me with information before his death. The custodes have the first fragment now, but they lack the key you possess. Beware Domenico Salvatore. He is not a priest, but their operative. The 3rd fragment was hidden in the Languedoc, in caves beneath the Château de Montségur. I am heading there now. If you secure the 2nd fragment, meet me at the coordinates below in 7 days. Trust no one else." "Could be a trap," Thomas warned. "Or our only ally," Eleanor countered. "Either way, Kildrummy is our next move." The ancient castle loomed against the darkening sky as they approached the next afternoon. Most of the structure lay in ruins, but the snow tower, named for its pale stone, remained largely intact, rising like a defiant sentinel above the Scottish Highlands. "The Historical Society keeps it locked," Michelle noted as they approached the perimeter fence. "Not for long," Thomas replied, producing a set of slender tools from his pocket. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Cybersecurity includes lockpicking now? Physical penetration testing, he corrected with a half smile. You'd be surprised how often corporate espionage still relies on old-fashioned breaking and entering. The lock yielded quickly, and they slipped inside the tower as dusk settled over the landscape. The interior was cold, with narrow spiral stairs leading upward into darkness. The Chamber of Secrets was supposedly accessible only from the Earl's private quarters, Eleanor said, shining her flashlight upward. Top floor. They climbed in silence, the weight of centuries pressing around them. The upper chamber was disappointing, empty except for a few wooden beams and the remnants of a fireplace. There has to be something, Eleanor insisted, running her hands along the stone walls. Medieval builders loved their hidden passages. Thomas examined the fireplace. The hearthstone is different from the others, newer. Together they pushed and prodded until the stone shifted, revealing a narrow space beneath. Eleanor reached in and felt cold metal, a lockbox ornately decorated with crusader crosses and geometric patterns. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside lay a parchment similar to the first, but the writing was different. Norse runes interspersed with Latin text. More importantly, the bottom of the page featured the same sigil, but with additional elements, a second layer of the complex symbol. It's like a puzzle, Michelle observed. Each fragment contains part of the complete sigil. Eleanor carefully photographed the document. This one speaks of the false unifier who bears the mark of sevenfold wisdom but serves the beast. It describes signs to identify this figure, words of peace while preparing war, performing wonders through the invisible fire that connects all people. Sounds like it could describe any charismatic political figure with an internet connection, Thomas remarked. There's more, Eleanor continued. When the 7 seals are broken by the 7 tremors, seek the 3rd fragment in the land of heretics, where the perfect ones once faced the flame rather than surrender truth. The Cathars, Michelle said immediately. In Languedoc, exactly where your mysterious emailer mentioned, Montségur was the last Cathar stronghold to fall during the Albigensian Crusade. A sound from below froze them in place, footsteps on the stone stairs. Thomas doused their lights. Someone followed us. Eleanor quickly secured the parchment in her jacket and slid the lockbox back into its hiding place. They pressed themselves against the wall beside the doorway. A beam of light preceded the visitor, sweeping across the room. Then a figure stepped through, a man in dark clothing with the collar of a Catholic priest. Father Salvatore, I presume, Eleanor said coldly. The man turned, remarkably unsurprised. Dr. Blackwood, I thought we might meet here. His English carried a slight Italian accent. I believe you have something that belongs to the church. The Templars weren't treated very well by the church, she replied. I doubt they intended their legacy to fall into Vatican hands. You misunderstand the situation, Salvatore said. The Custodes Secreti do not serve the public face of the church, but its deeper purpose. Some knowledge must be controlled for the greater good. Like prophecies of apocalypse and false messiahs, Eleanor challenged. Salvatore's expression hardened. The last sigil is dangerous precisely because it's not merely superstition. The Templars accessed knowledge they shouldn't have, secrets from Solomon's temple that even they didn't fully comprehend. So you admit the prophecy might be authentic? Authentic enough that it cannot be allowed to circulate in this unstable world. Salvatore stepped forward. The first signs are already manifesting. If the complete prophecy emerges now, it will trigger panic, possibly accelerate the very events it warns against. Or prepare people to resist them, Thomas countered. Salvatore shook his head. Human nature doesn't work that way. Now, please, hand over the fragment and the key. The standoff was interrupted by Michelle's shout. 2 more men had appeared on the stairs behind Salvatore, neither wearing clerical attire, both holding weapons. The custodes contracted this out, Salvatore explained apologetically. I advised against it, but I was overruled. What happened next unfolded in chaotic sequence. Thomas lunged at one gunman, while Eleanor threw her backpack at the other. Michelle grabbed a wooden beam and swung it at Salvatore. In the confusion, Eleanor bolted for the stairs, the precious parchment secure inside her jacket. Shouts and the sounds of struggle echoed behind her as she descended the spiral staircase at dangerous speed. Outside, the Scottish twilight had deepened to purple. She ran toward the tree line, praying Thomas and Michelle would escape. A gunshot cracked through the evening air. Eleanor didn't look back. The Château de Montségur perched atop its rocky peak like a crown of stone, commanding the Ariège Valley below. Even in ruins, it exuded defiance, the last stronghold of the Cathar heresy, where hundreds chose death by fire rather than renounce their beliefs. Eleanor approached from the forest path, exhaustion slowing her steps. The journey from Scotland had been a nightmare of false identities and paranoid precautions. She had no idea if Thomas or Michelle had escaped Kildrummy Castle. Her attempts to contact them had gone unanswered, and she dared not try again for fear of revealing her location. The coordinates from the mysterious email led not to the castle itself, but to a small shepherd's hut halfway up the mountain. As she approached, the door opened, revealing an elderly man with a neatly trimmed white beard and eyes that reflected both kindness and wariness. "Dr. Eleanor Blackwood," he said, his English carrying a French lilt. "I was beginning to fear you wouldn't make it. I am Bernard Authier." "A Cathar name," Eleanor noted, remaining at a cautious distance. The old man smiled. "From a family of good Christians, as the Cathars called themselves. Some traditions persist, even after 7 centuries of persecution." He gestured inside. "Please enter. We have little time." The interior was austere but comfortable. Maps and historical documents covered one wall, alongside photographs of archaeological sites. On a small table lay an object she recognized immediately, an ivory cylinder identical to the one stolen from her lab. "You have the first fragment," she said. "A reproduction," Bernard corrected. "I've spent my life studying and preserving Templar and Cathar knowledge. Richard Keller was my colleague and friend before the custodies silenced him." "You knew about the last sigil?" Bernard nodded gravely. "For decades it existed only as rumor, a final prophecy entrusted to the Templars. Then 3 years ago, Richard discovered references to it in a private collection in Malta. He was getting close when he died. His last message to me mentioned you, his most brilliant student. He called you." Eleanor felt a pang of grief. I didn't believe his theories about Vatican conspiracies. Few would. That's how they've operated for centuries. Bernard unrolled a map of the region. The caves beneath Montségur form a vast network. During the siege of 1244, the Cathars used them to smuggle out sacred texts and treasures. Local legend speaks of Templar knights who came in the night before the final surrender, departing with a treasure of wisdom that had been hidden at Montségur. "The third fragment," Eleanor concluded, withdrawing the second fragment from her secure pouch. "I have this one, but the first fragment was stolen." "The custodes have it," Bernard confirmed, "but they cannot interpret it correctly without the other pieces. The fragments aren't just divided physically, they're encoded to reveal their true meaning only when reunited." Eleanor studied the map. Where exactly in the caves would the Templars have hidden it? "There's a chamber known locally as La Salle des Étoiles, the Hall of Stars. The ceiling is natural limestone embedded with crystals that reflect light like stars. In medieval times, it was used for astronomical observations." A memory surfaced from the parchment text. When the morning star rises in the west during the feast of John the Baptist, today is June 24th. Bernard nodded. The feast day, and Venus is visible in the western sky after sunset. The eclipse comes tomorrow. As for the 7 tremors, 5 have been recorded in Jerusalem this week. Eleanor felt the weight of history pressing upon her. Then we need to find the 3rd fragment tonight. They waited until darkness fell before making their way to a concealed cave entrance Bernard had identified. The narrow passage required them to proceed single file, their headlamps illuminating limestone formations sculpted by millennia of flowing water. The Cathars believed material existence was corrupted, Bernard explained as they descended deeper. They saw themselves as spirits trapped in flesh, seeking to return to the realm of light. Their dualist theology regarded the God of the Old Testament as a demiurge, a false creator. The true God was purely spiritual, associated with light and love. No wonder Rome considered them dangerous heretics, Eleanor commented. The Templars were officially Orthodox, but their years in the East exposed them to Gnostic and Sufi teachings. Some scholars believe a secret inner order developed syncretic beliefs drawn from multiple traditions. The passage widened into a breathtaking chamber. Their lights revealed a domed ceiling studded with crystalline formations that scattered their beams into thousands of pinpoints, a subterranean sky. La salle d'étoiles, Bernard whispered reverently. They searched methodically, examining every crevice and formation. After an hour, Eleanor's frustration mounted. There's nothing here that looks like a hiding place. Bernard stood in the center, turning slowly. The Templars were master geometers. They wouldn't think in terms of hiding places, but in mathematical relationships. He pointed upward. Look at the pattern formed by the largest crystal clusters. Eleanor tilted her head back. 7 major clusters formed a constellation reminiscent of the Pleiades, the 7 sisters. Now look at the floor. Faint lines were etched into the limestone, almost invisible until viewed from the right angle, a geometric design that mirrored the crystal formation above. As above, so below, Bernard murmured. A hermetic principle the Templars would have known well. In the center of the floor pattern was a small depression. Eleanor knelt and brushed away centuries of dust to reveal an inlaid metal plate. The plate bore the now familiar sigil, but with a keyhole at its center. The brass key from the first fragment fit perfectly. With a sound like distant bells, a section of the floor shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Within lay a small stone box carved with intricate geometric patterns. The box contained the 3rd fragment, a parchment scroll protected by an oilskin wrapper that had preserved it remarkably well. More importantly, the sigil at its bottom completed the pattern begun by the other 2 fragments. This one speaks of renewal, Eleanor said as she carefully translated the ancient text. When the false light is revealed, seek the children of the true light. The new temple shall not be built of stone, but of awakened hearts united in knowledge. The old orders shall fall, but the inner order shall rise. A sound echoed from the tunnel entrance, voices and footsteps. Bernard's face darkened. The custodes, they must have followed us. Is there another way out? Eleanor asked urgently. Yes, but Bernard hesitated. Dr. Blackwood, Eleanor, we must decide quickly. If we flee with the fragments, the custodes will never stop hunting us. The prophecy will remain fragmented, its warning unheeded. What's the alternative? We complete what the Templars began. We reunite the fragments here now, under the stars as they commanded. The prophecy was meant to be revealed when the conditions aligned, which is now. Eleanor hesitated only a moment before nodding. Let's do it. Bernard withdrew a folded paper from his pocket, a hand-drawn copy of the first fragment. Together with Eleanor's second fragment and the newly discovered third, they arranged the parchments in a triangle on the chamber floor, aligning the partial sigils to form a complete symbol. As the edges touched, a phenomenon neither scientist could explain began. The ink seemed to flow across the boundaries between fragments, the symbol reshaping itself before their eyes. Words written in invisible ink became visible, forming new text that filled the spaces between the original writings. Incredible, Eleanor breathed. Some kind of medieval chemical reaction triggered by reuniting the fragments. The completed text revealed the full prophecy, warnings of institutional collapse, environmental devastation, technological enslavement, and spiritual deception that seemed eerily prescient for events already unfolding in the modern world. But it also contained hope, instructions for forming a new order of knowledge keepers who would preserve wisdom through the coming darkness. The footsteps grew closer. "They're almost here," Bernard said. "We need to decide. Do we try to escape with this knowledge, or what?" Eleanor asked. Bernard looked at her steadily. "The Templars didn't just leave a warning. They left a choice. Look at the final paragraph." Eleanor read aloud. "To those who discover this sigil in its appointed time, you stand at the crossroads of fate. To reveal this knowledge to a world unprepared may hasten the very calamity it foretells. To suppress it entirely serves the false light. The middle path requires guardians willing to carry the burden of truth, to preserve it while working quietly to awaken those with eyes to see and ears to hear. Choose wisely, for the future turns upon this moment." The voices were at the chamber entrance now. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Eleanor recognized Salvatore among the shadowy figures, alongside men in tactical gear. "Dr. Blackwood," Salvatore called, "please step away from the fragments." Eleanor looked from the approaching custodies to Bernard, then down at the completed prophecy with its intricate sigil, a symbol that seemed to pulse with its own inner light in the crystal-reflected glow. In that moment, she understood why the Templars had hidden their final message from the world. Some truths were too dangerous to be widely known, yet too important to be entirely forgotten. The last sigil wasn't just a prophecy. It was a test of wisdom, of courage, of the ability to hold paradox in an open hand. "What will you choose, Eleanor?" Bernard asked softly. The future turned upon her answer.